Hey everyone, you are listening to the Animalia Hour on KGVM. We are a podcast based in Bozeman, Montana, committed to environmentalism, human health, and redefining our relationship to other animals. We hope through this podcast to inspire you to live vegan for the same reasons. I'm Kevin.
I'm Lucy.
And I'm Sarah. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Yeah.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. It's a beautiful fall day out there.
It is. It's a beautiful day. I'm feeling very grateful today for this radio show, for you guys, and for our listeners. And yeah, we're doing this about 7 months, I think.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Yeah. So thank you to KGVM, our radio station host, for being such an all-inclusive radio station.
Yeah,
and
100%.
letting us do this.
I've thought of that many times when I listen to all the content that we put out.
Yeah. Definitely.
I do appreciate KGVM.
Shout out to KGVM for
sure.
letting us do this.
100%.
So, but yeah, today I'm excited for our topic. I think it's an important one and it's very interesting. I think in a future life, I'd like to go to law school, and I just love learning about laws and how our government works. And sometimes it can be very discouraging. You could start to feel dismayed and give up and be like, what's the point? Like, we have no power. We have no control. Things are so corrupt, and why even vote? And, all of these, you could really start to feel like it's a hopeless situation. But then you find out about some people, like we'll be talking about today, like this Wayne Zhang.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's many others, but these people who are fighting the good fight and who are tirelessly standing up for the oppressed and making the world a better place. And, they're very inspirational and just makes you remember, like, there is good that we can do.
Right. And there are good people out there fighting. And
we shouldn't give up. We shouldn't become hopeless, and we should continue to speak the truth and do whatever we can. So, but yeah, I think a good place to start with this topic is just kind of going back to our roots as Americans, going back to, and no disrespect to our French co-host.
Oh yeah. Well, we got our philosophies from
many.
the French.
Yes. So I mean, we are a sister nation in many ways, or historically have been. So yeah, this isn't just say that we're the only fabulous government, or that we have like fabulous governmental documents that kind of lay out our foundation of our aspirations as a nation. And that's truly what they are. I mean, I think whenever I lead my students in the Pledge of Allegiance, it's not that I truly believe that there's liberty and justice for all on the street level of everyday experience for people, but those are the aspirations that we can at least say, this is how it should be. This is what we're fighting for. This is what we aspire to be.
Right.
And so, yeah, our Constitution, I'm so thankful. And again, our founding fathers were giants when it came to crafting these documents and crafting our government. And no, they were not as progressive as we wish they were. We look back and go, it kind of sucks that you owned human beings, you enslaved human beings, even though you're writing these documents about personal liberties and freedoms. But I think we can still appreciate the good that they did do, right? So it's interesting to note that our Constitution, written in 1787, ratified in 1788, and amended. We're going to talk about the Bill of Rights, the 10 First Amendments, amended in 1791. But our Constitution is the world's longest surviving written charter of government. So in the whole world, we have the longest surviving charter for government. Yeah.
Really? I didn't know that. You think the French, you guys don't have a document that's...
you
guys update your Declaration of your Constitution?
I think it's probably from the same time, but it was probably changed. I have no idea. I don't know enough.
Yeah, I was surprised to read that. So yeah, I think it's something that we can be proud of. It's stood the test of time, and it's good bones. Whatever it is, it's a solid foundation that lays out how our government should check each other, the branches of government should check each other, and how the rights of the individual citizens should be protected. So, in fact, the first three words of the preamble to the Constitution, "We the people," the fact that it starts, we the people, it affirms that the government of the United States exists to serve its citizens. It was kind of unique in its time. It was revolutionary to be like, the government should exist. Its only reason to exist is to preserve and protect the rights and to serve the rights of the citizens. And James Madison, of course, was a chief author of the Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights. So we're just going to be talking today a little bit about the First Amendment, and then we're going to go into some laws that kind of fly in the face of the First Amendment and that we really need to be aware of and stand up against. So, but I think it's just worth noting, like, if you were going to amend the Constitution, what would you put at the top of the list? So it's just really interesting to note, like, what did he put in the First Amendment? So if we could just read First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So it starts out, he was a big fan of freedom of religion. And so that's how it begins, that government should keep their hands off religion. And then the second section is basically, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. And that's the section that we're going to be focused on today, that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. And so it's just fascinating that that was so important, that those freedoms are so important that he put them in the very First Amendment. And then it goes on to say that also you can't abridge the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, like I said, I think our conversation today is going to be focusing on the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press, because that's where people have a right to speak their truth. The government has to be held accountable. Corporations have to be held accountable. The rich and the powerful have to be held accountable, right? It's like those are the people who would want to squash freedom of speech. Those are the entities that would threaten, right? So like why is that important? Like why is it important that people are able to speak freely and not be criminalized? You know, or why is it important that the press can investigate what's going on and tell the people about it, right?
Right.
Like these are fundamental, important things to have a healthy, thriving society. And yeah, the First Amendment loves, if anything, it encourages a robust, open debate, right? Which is not always pleasant. It's not always comfortable, because there's going to be conflict. There's going to be emotions. There's going to be anger. There's going to be, on and on. But it's necessary.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's just these days. I mean, these guys were great political philosophers. And today, it just seems like our country's so polarized. No one's really, not too many people, like at the street level, or just the common man doesn't seem that interested in debate. People know what they believe and they hold to their beliefs. And, some people do. Some people like to, but our political system is so polarized, it seems to me, these days. And it's so polarized that even other views wouldn't get a chance to even get on a ballot. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's just so...
Right. It's almost like even our choices have been curated for us by the powerful.
Right. And then we're all complaining about lesser two evils. Oh, well, you know what I mean? That those are our choices. I mean, that's just a pretty sad state.
Right. Like I said, it's easy to get very jaded and very dismayed and very hopeless. But I think that's something we have to fight against, because...
There was a quote, I should find it, where somebody said, voting for the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Right. But I think that's why... instead of going down that path, which is very defeating, people like Wayne Hsiang, who the grassroots movements, the petitions, the fighting for laws to be overturned in court, those are the things that we can get behind and have hope that, we can make a difference. So yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say that it's the citizens' job and responsibility to hold the government and corporations accountable. It's hard to know always how to do that, but we're at least trying to find ways. and to make sure that our freedoms are not getting whittled away. So again, just like as a little refresher, there's 3 branches of our government, right? The legislative branch makes the laws. So those are our legislators. The executive branch enforces those laws. And then the judicial branch evaluates and interprets those laws. So we're going to be looking at a certain group of laws today that have been popping up, I guess, around the country. They started showing up in the 1990s, and they kind of had a rebirth in like 2010, 2011. And we'll talk about why and who was behind that. But basically, these laws criminalize the investigation of corporations, and they criminalize whistleblowing when abuses are found in those corporations. So does that sound like something that's going to stand?
That sounds very interesting to me.
Does that sound like something that should stand up to the test of the First Amendment? Do you think laws that criminalize investigations would stand up to the First Amendment?
Should not.
Right. Or laws that criminalize whistleblowing of abuses? Should that stand up to our freedom of speech and our freedom of the press? It doesn't sound like
No.
it sounds so. We have some good news that a lot of these laws have not stood the test of the First Amendment. So,
and isn't that interesting? As we'll learn through this, that like laws are made and then they get tested, and then they get struck down. And some laws haven't been tested, so they're still like on the books. So it's our job as citizens to push back and test these laws.
So if a law is abridging the freedom of speech and the freedom of press, basically investigations into like certain corporations, would you say that those laws are there serving the people, or who are those laws serving, do you think?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty clearly serving the corporate interests.
Serving the corporate interests.
Capitalism.
Against the citizens, basically.
100%.
Which is not what we want to do in this country. Thank you, Father James Madison. So yeah, the laws we're talking about are called Ag-Gag Laws, basically referring to gagging people from investigating or talking about or documenting what's going on in agriculture. So they seek to gag would-be whistleblowers and undercover activists by punishing them for recording footage of what goes on in animal agriculture. These started coming out basically because animal agriculture understands that if people were to see the truth, the ugly truth of what is going on in these places to the animals, how sick the animals are, how wounded and diseased and miserable these animals are, how abused they are, that the citizens would have a problem with it.
Right.
So they have, they very successfully have put a lot of money into deceiving the public, keeping it out of our conscious awareness, keeping it out of sight, and then putting forth this very positive, very deceiving, very happy image through their, yeah.
Well, no, and that just, to me, I've talked to people, and Lucy, I don't know about you and your outreach when you talk to people, but I remember I talking to this woman. I've talked to a few different people, but one at work, she just, when I would tell her these things, like this is what's happening in slaughterhouses, she actually, no, that's not happening.
Yeah.
That's not happening here in the United States. That would never happen.
Even when you show them, it's like, that's extreme. No.
No, but I show them that she's like, that's not from here. That's not from the United States. That doesn't happen here. I'm like, are you serious? Like,
right.
Like she believed that it was like when I was lying to her.
Right. So that the laws, I mean, everybody knows this on some level. The lies that you get through advertising are so subtle, and they kind of slip in under your radar, and you find that you believe the message of the advertiser without even consciously thinking about it.
But isn't that propaganda right there? And the media's great at this.
Mhm.
It just they keep repeating these same sound bites over and over and over.
Or just the images of
Right.
the cows on pasture.
Right.
And
On your milk carton.
yeah.
Yeah. Everything. Oh, happy. And just the names of some of these dairies.
Yeah, fair life.
Right.
And right. So once again, we're asking ourselves and our listeners, do you really believe the image, the public relations image that the animal agribusiness seeks to put forth? Because when we see, when investigators go in and they document what's actually going on, the animal agribusiness is so upset that they have written laws. They've pushed to have our legislators submit laws or submit bills to be made into law to silence these investigators, to imprison them,
Right.
to find them and imprison them.
To label them as terrorists.
Even so far as to label them as terrorists. Exactly. The industry had a choice here when these investigations were coming forward, thank you to the internet and things like that. They could have said, oh, maybe we should raise our standards. Maybe we should improve the lives of animals. Maybe we should actually start thinking about how to be more humane. They could have done that, or they could do what they did, which is try to silence the whistleblowers.
Right.
Or they could have changed their whole production and then switched to plants.
Yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
Humanely exploit animals, right?
Exactly.
sure.
Exactly. They could have been like, oh, maybe we should find a less cruel business to make our money at.
Right.
The Ag-Gag Laws basically have 3 elements. And the reason they're so uniform from state to state, maybe we could talk about now, is because they were model legislation written up, drafted by an organization that you may know. So model legislation, if you're not sure what that is, it's when a group kind of comes up with a template for a law that they think should be a good law in all the states, and they kind of just draft it out and hand it to state legislators and say, hey, take this to your house and try to see if you can get this passed. So lots of times the law from state to state is identical or almost identical.
Right.
So yeah, you might be interested to know that a lot of these laws were drafted up by an organization called ALEC, known as ALEC, which stands for American Legislative Exchange Council.
Right. Very interesting organization in everything that's happening in our country. They are behind so many things.
Like privatized prisons and keeping prisons full.
Yeah,
for
keeping
profit.
prisons full. So CCA Corporation, which has changed their name already.
So they've been behind legislation to like longer prison sentences for crimes, just increasing our prison population by like 70%
Right.
in the past.
And that has to do with the 13th Amendment that, you can have free slave labor pretty much if someone's imprisoned. And there's a whole documentary on that. Ava DuVernay has a documentary, you can see it on Netflix, called 13. And they're a part of so many things, Alec. And
they undermine workers' rights. They undermine worker organizing.
Yeah, unionizing, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Voter suppression, gerrymandering. They also want to rewrite the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, there's also a site out there called
That makes sense for once.
Yeah, really. Well, I was just going to say, if you want to look further, there's a website out there called Alec Exposed. You can Google that, and you can see all kinds of information.
I think one of their biggest things is because basically they are a conglomeration of big corporations,
They are.
right? So what they hate, what a lot of big corporations hate more than anything, is environmentalists
Right.
and eco-friendly legislation, things like that. So they're big friends. Alec is big friends with big polluters.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the big companies. And what's interesting about them, it's just one example. It was founded in 1973. It's a conservative activist organization, and the guy who founded it, his name is Paul Weyrich. He's actually the guy that coined the term moral majority that we heard from Jerry Falwell. But what's interesting about them, there's just a little facts, and they kind of work at the state level. Okay. It says more than 1/3 of all state lawmakers are ALEC members. With membership, they receive perks like free trips for spouses and children, Broadway theater tickets, and dinners at expensive restaurants. A 1994 ALEC conference included a golf tournament sponsored by R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, skeet and trap shooting sponsored by the National Rifle Association, and a trip to Busch Gardens sponsored by Anheuser-Busch Companies. If state lawmakers need help traveling to ALEC events, they can obtain scholarships from corporate sponsors. State legislatures, as we know, even here in Montana, sometimes they're part-time gigs. They're not full-time. They might be ranchers. They might have other jobs, but they also do their legislative duties. But that's not a problem because if you are an ALEC member and you can't pay your dues, no worries, because if you help change the laws for the corporations are going to pay you back handsomely. And here's just one example. It says about 97.9% of ALEC's $5.69 million budget in 2000, total revenue that year came from corporate and charitable foundations, corporations like Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Amoco, Chevron, Shell, and Texaco. They pay nearly all of ALEC's expenses. So it's just one of these things where corporations are literally in the back pocket of our legislatures. And so they invite the legislatures to these conferences. They send them and their families off to Busch Gardens and to golfing while the corporate lawmakers or corporate lawyers stay back and write these laws. And then when the conference is over, they hand them this bill, they take it back to their state house, and they try to get it passed. And it's just crazy.
So in other words, corporations are writing our laws.
100%. 100%.
I mean, I hope that makes you a little uncomfortable when you hear that corporations are writing our laws. Like that's dangerous.
Well,
that's disturbing. It's just wrong.
The whole point is our
Fully
government
corrupted.
Yeah, 100%. And our government should be protecting us from this kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, because it's not serving the citizen; it's serving the powerful corporation who doesn't really care about the citizens.
And by the way, I was reading from a book by Will Potter. It's called "Green is the New Red: An Insider's Account of a Social Movement Under Siege."
Yeah, we'll talk about a lot of recommendations we have at the end as well.
Right, I just want to throw that out there, though.
Yeah. It's a very good book.
So these Ag-Gag laws have basically 3 elements. You'll see this from state to state. Basically, there's a prohibition against photography, video recording, or other document collection. So again, these should be protected under free speech. And when these laws are challenged in courts, lots of times the judge will completely see that and establish that taking a videotape of what's going on is an expressive act of speech, and it's protected speech.
Right. And it just brings up for me again the fact that many slaughterhouses don't have windows. I just want to point that out. It keeps coming up for me. I used to work in the military.
They're so far away from any public thoroughfare.
They're so far away, but they don't have any windows. And anyway, I just remember when I worked in the military, I worked in military intelligence, and we didn't have any windows in our SCIFs, secret compartment and information facilities, and that's because we had secrets to hide. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So prohibition against photography, video recording, or other document collection. Again, to me, that sounds like you're not protecting the freedom of the press. Second prohibition is against misrepresenting oneself in order to gain access to an animal agriculture facility. I'd just like to point out too, like that's also been struck down because the judge acknowledged that if someone is an investigator, they have every right to misrepresent themselves to get access.
How would they get access ever? And I wanted to, show the abuses that you're.
And not even the press, but law enforcement, the executive branch of the government has a very well established practice of undercover law enforcement, where you completely have to misrepresent yourself in order to gain access to the information that you need.
Oh, absolutely. And the police are allowed to lie. We know that's constitutional.
So again, this smacks of lack of freedom of the press. Because a lot of times these activists did go to journalism school and they don't want to have to say that on their application, or they have worked they are associated with political organizations that they shouldn't have to disclose, and things like that. So anyway, so that's the second prohibition. And the third of 3 is requiring individuals to report animal cruelty to authorities within a short time period of witnessing the event. And that lots of times this is presented to the legislature as, oh, we care so much about animals being abused. We want this to be reported immediately. If you get documentation of animal abuse, you have to report it immediately because we care. It's sold that way, but that is the opposite of what it is, because basically what it's saying is we're going to criminalize you if you take the time to build a case. If you want to do, sometimes a good investigation takes weeks or months to put together a case that can actually stand up in court, because it's so easy for the agriculture business to say, oh, that was a one-off. That is not how we do things. That was a bad apple, right? We hear that all the time. Yeah. That was just a bad apple. We punished that worker. We fired that worker. But no, this is not how we run things at our place, right? And so it makes it impossible. It forestalls the ability to actually put together a real investigation. And again, if you put that prohibition on any other journalist, like if you said to a journalist, hey, you have to run your story within 24 hours of finding it out, like that would never pass a First Amendment scrutiny. Because, journalists, investigators need time to put together a case. So those are the three elements of these Ag-Gag laws.
What keeps coming up for me in this whole discussion is we haven't used the term yet, or maybe we briefly mentioned the word eco-terrorism. And there's also another word out there called ecotage, kind of like sabotage, ecotage. And it seems like the word was first used in 1983. It was in a libertarian magazine. Then it was first mentioned in Congress in a statute in 1988. And then it finally trickled down into the media. In 2002, the FBI was using it, but then in 2009, it became a pretty common term. And so what's interesting, if you read Will Potter's book and you listen to him give lectures, he mentions that many of the people on the Animal Liberation Front or the Earth Liberation Front, they're not violent people. And in fact, part of their mission, part of their charter is to do everything they can to make sure no humans or animals are injured. Some of the things they do, they try to disable equipment, things like that, but they don't harm people. But yet they're being identified as violent people. And so what's happening is we're creating laws. There are already laws on the books for violent people, violent offenders. Mm-hmm. But now we're creating laws to call them terrorists.
When they're not actually harming people or animals.
But so obviously it's a very intentional choice that ALEC used when their model bill was actually called the Animal and Ecological Terrorism Act.
Right.
Out of all the words they could have chosen, they decided, let's use the word terrorism because that's the most inflammatory, sensational word we can label these people with. And it makes them sound like the enemy that must be defeated.
But it's also, go ahead.
Also something that I found really interesting in the book from Will Potter is that he was saying that before this happened, before they used these words to describe these activists were actually presented in the press. There was a pretty positive image of them. Mm-hmm. People were like, oh, they're pretty cool, etc. And after they introduced these terms, of course, it really worked. And in the book, Will Potter actually, he talks about how their whole strategy was to use terms so that they could turn the language in their favor, pretty much. Like the words you use are super powerful. Mm-hmm. Either you're a hero or you're a terrorist, right? And something that's really important to know is, so they're trying to basically call property damage violence, and while saying at the same time that since the animals they are using are property, it's not violence to exploit them and kill them, etc.
Right.
So we have this double speech, pretty much like you have this double message.
Right. No, exactly. It's if someone is trying to rescue these animals from harm
and sabotage the equipment.
Yeah, and sabotage the equipment, they're terrorists. And there's laws against the non-property owner causing any kind of disruption and or harm to an animal, but the property owner can do whatever they want with this animal. They can kill the animal, they can skin the animal, they can do whatever, and that's okay.
Or they could just allow them to languish.
That makes no sense because they are property, and so you know what I mean. Like if you gotta pick one, you can't just
it's a disjunction, yeah. And also, I just want to say, I think the point of calling these people terrorists is that the penalty is greater for them, right?
Yeah.
And they're villains. They're villains, and terrorists are villains, and we're going to make sure we put them away for life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's interesting that like one of their biggest strategies seems to be PR, like public relationships.
Right.
Like let's put out an image of what our industry is like, and let's silence the whistleblowers, and then let's call the whistleblowers, let's use the most inflammatory term we possibly can.
It's advertising.
Well, I mean, this is the playbook, though. This is the CIA, the FBI. This is what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what our government does. They're specialists at this. I mean, they all have units within their organizations devoted to this kind of thing. I mean, it is what it is.
To control perception.
Control perception. I mean, the CIA and the FBI have been doing this for years. I mean, it's what we do.
So let's go through just a little bit, kind of on a state-by-state basis. I mean, there's several states that have had no activity, that, these laws have not been brought, or the bills have not been brought into the state legislature to be made into law. But many states, I think I counted 17 states, the bill was brought to create Ag-Gag laws within the state, and the legislation was just defeated out of hand, including Washington, California, Colorado, Nebraska, Illinois, Pennsylvania. Like I said, there's about 17 of them. There, of course, were some states where this legislation passed and has just been left on the books. And Montana is one of those. I would say Montana, North Dakota, and Missouri have Ag-Gag laws that have not been challenged, and they haven't been struck down. Montana's Ag-Gag laws, if I could say anything positive about them, is they are less problematic, less non-constitutional than many of the other states. Basically, Montana bans recording only for those who have, quote, the intent to commit criminal defamation. And that's pretty similar to North Dakota's Ag-Gag laws. Basically, that's not really worrisome it's not as worrisome as some of the other states' Ag-Gag laws, because defamation by definition is that you're going in with the intent to lie and misrepresent the truth. But these videos are not doing that.
Right. They speak for themselves. You don't need to say anything.
They're not staged. They're not, the activist didn't somehow make it happen, especially if they have the ability to build the case to show that this is a systematic building-wide or, farm-wide practice. So it's a lighter touch of an Ag-Gag law than many of the other states.
But Montana is one of the states that does not allow video, photography, or pictures in one of these facilities. I think for the same reason, to cause defamation or harm to the organization. So not every state disallows video and or pictures.
So some of them don't have Ag-Gag laws on the books.
Right. They don't have laws on the
Montana
books.
does.
Right.
But yeah, specifically for people who are intending to commit defamation. So then we have some states where the legislation did pass, but they've been challenged in court, and they have been struck down because the judge saw them as unconstitutional. So those are really good news.
That's awesome.
So Idaho, Utah, Kansas, Iowa, North Carolina have all had the legislation on the books, and then they were challenged and they were struck down as unconstitutional. And then right now there's a lawsuit filed against the Ag-Gag law in Arkansas. And there's also some other cases going on that are related to Ag-Gag laws that we'll discuss briefly. So one of the first victories on a state level against the Ag-Gag laws that had been passed was Idaho. it was a great victory that basically made it so it's just all but guarantees there's going to be victories in any state where these laws get challenged, because it sets a precedent for other states to follow. So the Ag-Gag case in Idaho did happen back in 2015, so it's been a while ago. And Professor Justin Marceau of the University of Denver's Law School was one of the attorneys on the case. So basically, kind of some of what we've already said, the judge said that it should not be criminalized to be deceptive to gain access to these places, because that's necessary for investigators to do that. And then, the court resoundingly agreed that criminalizing that kind of thing would run afoul of the First Amendment. And of course, the Idaho law criminalized videotaping, photographing. And the court said that this is a violation of the First Amendment because these Ag-Gag cases, this is kind of what's exciting about these Ag-Gag cases, is for the first time, things like creating a video are now explicitly being put under the umbrella of protected speech, where before it wasn't really established that is protected speech. But the judge did say that the act of recording is pure expressive activity. And so if you say that recording isn't speech, then you are essentially saying that the watching or the exhibiting or the displaying of video is not protected speech. And so the judge said it's pretty clear that if I held that the making of video is not a form of speech, we would be in the Orwellian world. So if you know anything about 1984, where the government has control of literally everything and is listening to everybody. The judge said that the prohibitions on making videos are both content-based and viewpoint-based. So I did a little research. Viewpoint discrimination or content-based discrimination is basically when, and by the way, if your argument is found to be content-based or viewpoint-based, the courts are going to disfavor your case, basically, because whenever there's content discrimination, it's basically restricting speech because someone doesn't like the content of what you're saying. So basically, it's an unpopular viewpoint. And viewpoint discrimination is somebody just doesn't like your thoughts. Somebody doesn't like how you think about something. And so therefore, they want to make it they want to criminalize it. And that obviously runs afoul of the First Amendment.
Right. Wow.
I think now, because I don't want to forget to say it later, I just want to bring up states like North Carolina were like, okay, we don't want to be accused of being content-based or viewpoint-based, so we can't make this law look like we're only singling out journalists and activists who are whistleblowing within animal agriculture. We have to broaden it so that it doesn't look like we're just going after their viewpoint. And so they drew in all these industries, including nursing home industries. So basically they were criminalizing whistleblowing in places like nursing homes, childcare, all kinds of things like that. They basically were trying to make it illegal, a crime, to be a whistleblower in any industry, just so that they could get it passed. So this is the power of big ag. And powerful lobbying groups like the AARP, which is the lobbying group for retired people, were fighting against what they were doing because they're like, no, we need whistleblowers in nursing homes. Right. And even this powerful lobbying group couldn't stop it from originally being passed. It has been struck down, but they're willing to draw in all these industries and say, so we're not viewpoint based. We're against whistleblowing in any industry.
Wow.
Which is, again, how is this serving the citizen? How are these laws serving people?
Well, and it just reminds me, too, that even Will Potter, he might not he's a journalist, and while he might not go into these facilities and participate in some of the activities, he says he relies on whistleblowers. He relies on these activists who go do this work. Like his journalism is based on that. And so there have to be some protections. I mean, this is what we know about the freedom of the press, right? That in many ways and many times, our press holds our government accountable and our citizens. So anyway, we can go down the list,
corporations.
Right? Yeah, corporations, everything. Yeah. So, I mean, we need that. We need whistleblowers. We need that ability, that accountability.
Desperately.
And kind of similar to what you were saying, Will Potter's argument that, look, we have laws in place against violence and destruction. Like,
right.
you don't have to make these new laws that are basically taking away
right.
people's freedom of speech and freedom of press. This judge in Idaho said the same idea. He's like, we have laws to protect from trespassing. We have laws to protect you from defamation. Like, if they're lying about you, you can sue them for defamation. We have laws on the books to protect trade secrets.
Right.
These are generally applicable laws. So you don't have to go after. You can use counter speech. You don't have to squash their right to free speech.
Right.
Basically.
I want to say this earlier too, but I think the reason you would use the word terrorism, like you said, it was a PR campaign. It is this. You always hear about this, the court of public opinion, right? Mm-hmm. And juries, the way our system works, your average citizen, jury of your peers, how they would view things, and if you can control that message out in the public, whether or not juries should be influenced or not, it's like people are influenced by these things. As soon as you say terrorism, that's a trigger word.
Yeah, and it's already tainted. Even if you are not at all.
Even if you're not.
You're defamed. It's defamation.
And so trying to get what do we call it? Trying to get a fair trial anywhere, it could be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's very smart.
So this judge in Idaho, and by the way, I want to say this is a true Idaho judge. He grew up in Idaho. In fact, he grew up on a dairy farm. So if anything, you would have thought he would have been sympathetic to the state's Ag-Gag Laws, but he made short work of it. He just said this is completely unconstitutional. His name was Windmill, Winmill, which I thought was an interesting name.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so he ruled that since the animal agriculture business is it's supposed to be a highly regulated industry, so their privacy interests are actually less than other industries. And he said that the state completely ignores that food production is not a private matter. He said, quote, "It's hard to imagine a matter of greater public concern than the way our food is produced."
Wow.
This echoes the judge in the food disparagement case in Oprah's case in East Texas.
Oh, yeah.
But Windmill takes it a step further. He said, quote, "Protecting industry that produces our food supply from whistleblowing is not an interest that the government should ever contemplate as legitimate."
I love it.
And the state was trying to compare these investigations to either like if you allow this, then the next thing is people can have the right to put video cameras in your bathroom and peeping toms and if you think that Ag-Gag laws are unconstitutional, the next thing is people will have a right to spy on you in your bedroom.
That's insane.
And he said to suggest that you cannot have whistleblowing in such a powerful industry is perverse.
Wow.
He said,
awesome.
Also, the issues of animal welfare and animal abuse are issues of public interest. He said videos at this Idaho dairy showed animals being punched, dragged, pulled, stabbed. And the judge said, we need to encourage this kind of whistleblowing.
Isn't that interesting, though, that that's just a side note, but if an animal is stabbed before their time...
Right.
It's abuse, but when they're stabbed in the slaughterhouse, it's time, because of, it's more profitable for them to be stabbed now and not before.
We've sanctioned it.
It's really the property status of animals is...
I just want to quote this judge just a little bit more, if you'll indulge me, because it's so awesome. He said, quote, "We can't possibly justify an industry that wants to hide from its own bad actions." So they won on First Amendment rights, and they also won the case on equal protection grounds. He said there's folly in the reasoning that keeping things secret is the government's prerogative, that free speech and equal protection will always stand up. And he said this is a law that is designed perversely to protect big industry, and that is not a rational interest silencing whistleblowing is not a rational government interest. And I also just wanted to say, journalists like covering these ag-gag laws because to a journalist, it just smells of like anti-freedom of the press.
Right.
And so it's like, it's a dangerous precedent that people are trying to get these unconstitutional laws passed that prohibit investigation and
Right.
speech. So.
Yeah, Will Potter was mentioning that, like, these affect him and his livelihood. So journalists are always very interested and very keen to learn about these cases.
That case that you were alluding to, Kevin, with the activist that took 2 sick piglets to the vet. And then basically what that was is Smithfield had made this public promise back in 2008 that they were going to phase out the gestation crates that they keep mother pigs in. You know, and like they're just universally, people look at those things and say, those are terrible, those are cruel, should not be allowed. Like this mother pig for her whole life is just kept in this tiny cage that she can't even turn around. So Smithfield knew that they were getting publicly criticized for these gestation crates, and they promised that in 2008, that by 2018, they were going to have them completely phased out. They were going to stop using them. And so these activists were kind of monitoring the situation and knew that that probably wasn't what was going on. And so in 2018, Smithfield, again, publicly announced that they had kept their promise and that they had gotten rid of gestation crates. So these activists went into a Smithfield farm in Utah, and of course, every mother pig there was in a gestation crate. And that's when they found these 2 piglets that were on the brink of death and took them to get veterinary care.
That's crazy.
And then they took their footage and they confronted Costco with it because Costco is one of Smithfield's biggest buyers. And instead of saying, oh, let's do something about this, let's improve this situation, no, Costco reported the activists to the FBI. And that's how they ended up being on trial. But again, they won. They were not sent to prison in this case. So yeah. That was Wayne Zhang, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. I didn't write down the other activist's name. So it's not just Wayne Zhang, but his name keeps coming up in every research I do, every case I study. I'm like, there he is again. Wow. This guy is like a superhero.
That's awesome.
Yes. Call out to Wayne Zhang. We'd love to interview you someday. And how do you keep going? And,
right.
You know,
and all these amazing activists, and it just feels like, I'm not sure if it's very true, but it just seems like, from what I've heard, that the case, there's more and more successes in the these types of trials that we see. It feels like that, and it's so nice.
It's almost like the laws are intimidation to activists. They're trying to intimidate the activists, like, you could go to jail, don't do it. But it's like, as soon as there is a court case, a lot of the charges,
some have though. Some have.
I know. But you do hear about how all of a sudden when they go to trial, the charges are dropped because the animal agriculture business realizes, we don't want more attention. We don't want more press. Like, this isn't going to play well for us.
Right.
And so a lot of times it just kind of goes away, or not to say that some of these people don't face actual time in jail.
Right.
They do, but it is interesting. It does seem apparent that these laws are an intimidation tactic,
right?
Not actual, like, there's no teeth to it. Because again, the last thing they want, they're very allergic to more public eyes on what goes on. So.
All right, so we'd like to talk about the Sonoma trial, which is in California. It's happening right now. It's been happening since September of 2023. So it's basically a bunch of activists, including Wayne, who are charged for rescuing/stealing animals during different actions, direct actions, and these actions were open rescues. So that means that they went and rescued the animals with their faces uncovered. And this is part of a wider campaign by Direct Action Everywhere to basically extend the laws that apply to animals of any species like dogs that are trapped in hot cars, that you can basically rescue them without being charged for it. That these laws exist in 14 states in the US. So it's basically this campaign to extend these laws, to apply it to other species that are like, for example, farmed animals, animals in labs, like dogs in labs, for example, the same species. And so what's interesting about this trial is that they are not like the activists are not allowed to show the footage, the investigations that, and not the investigation, but they have filmed their rescues. And so basically a big part of the trial for them, like a big part of their defense, was to show that we have been rescuing these animals because of the animal cruelty going on and because they need rescuing. And without being allowed to show the footage and show the reality of what's happening in these industries, they have really no chance to show the jury of the why behind their actions. So I found that very interesting. And also they asked for the trial to be recorded, to be shown. And they were not allowed to do that either. So that goes back to the point of, the industry does not want to have more eyes on this, which makes total sense.
Right.
And I wanted to, talk basically about how, like, these trials are really about, like, the poverty status of animals. When you're trying to campaign for the right to rescue, you're trying to show people that these animals should be considered as non-human persons. You're trying to push basically expand our circle of consideration to non-human animals, for them to have the right to be protected from harm and to be protected from exploitation, as well. So it's, we've been talking a lot about animal welfare because that is also, I think, a strategy that animal liberation activists, meaning people who are vegans, do not want any exploitation, humane or non-human, whatever you want to call it, really, if there is such a thing. They want the end of the exploitation of animals, but a strategy that is often used is to already talk about to already use the laws that are there to protect animals from animal cruelty, not animal exploitation, but animal cruelty. And from there, you can start talking about the rights to not be exploited and to be considered, basically considering non-humans as non-human persons with the right to live.
Nice.
So the fact that they're having such a hard time in this case, getting their evidence to be submissible, the fact that the judge is trying to say, no, you can't bring we're going to not allow you to bring in these witnesses, and we're not allow you to bring in this evidence, it's kind of very discouraging because, they have very damning evidence. They have video of, which they submitted to the court, images of videos of birds stuck in their cages, unable to move or access food or water, open wounds, birds with prolapsed vents, and numerous dead animals laying there among the living birds who are still trying to survive and lay eggs among the dead animals. So
it reminded me of something, the fact that, these laws to protect dogs from dying in hot cars. So there's these laws protecting these dogs that we see firsthand, right? And then there's these dogs in these laboratories, the same species. So even if we have a bias to that species, it's the same species. They die, experimented on and tortured in laboratories. And they are not protected because they're seen as livestock, because we are not connected to them. We don't see them firsthand, right? The public doesn't.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting how we have a bias towards the animals that we are connected to, like, firsthand, because we see them so often, we live with them, and it's just like these strangers, like these animals that we don't know, we don't care so much about. But it just shows you, like, if you care about your friend, they should be protected because they're a sentient being, right? If there's a stranger in another country or like in another state, you don't know them, you don't necessarily care about them, but it's not because of that they shouldn't be protected. They should be protected just as much as your friend, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing for these animals. We're trying, like, to kind of maybe show that this is like the same thing. Like, even if you don't know these animals firsthand and you don't care about them, they're all sentient, they're all the same, they're the dog in the car is the same as a cow in the slaughterhouse, or a fish, that's being fished or whatever.
Right.
So as we kind of move to a close, of course, there's a lot more we could discuss. This is a big topic, and it's very interesting and important. But there was a quote by Thomas Jefferson I thought might sum up to close out. He said, "All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent." So these laws that clearly are not put in place to serve citizens and are not constitutional are definitely something that we should all be aware of. And, you can go onto the sites like Sentient Media and sign the petition against Ag-Gag Laws. And
righttorescue.com. They need 50,000 signatures. They already have more than 45,000. So go sign the letter, for the right to rescue. There's also a really cool movie. It's a fictional movie, but it's about animal liberation activists, of ALF and the terrorism laws. It's awesome. It's from 2010. It's called Bold Native. You can watch it for free at boldnative.com. And a book that we've been quoting is called Green is the New Red by Will Potter. It's basically a book on the history of ALF and ELF, Animal Liberation Front and Environmental Liberation Front, their activism and the trials, etc.
Good stuff.
I recommend that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening, guys.
Yeah. All right.
Have a great day.
Catch you next time.
Bye.
Later.